Hello, my fellow sensitive people. Okay, we have a lot to talk about. I have literally 3 journals worth of information that we're going to be getting to look at today. The first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk a little bit about Kim Jong-un because I think that this may start to be breaking. Now, I want to preface this story that I'm about to tell you as possibly just a story. Because when we do these remote views, we're talking about real people and real people's lives. So I always say there's truth in the pretend, but I always want to say that this is an entertainment channel. We make mistakes all the time and then we review and we try to figure it out. So I want to say all of that before I start this first remote, which is about Kim Jong-un. All right, Kim Jong-un. I'm going to tell you a story about Kim Jong-un, and I want you to just imagine this story. So, a couple of weeks ago, he decided to go to, he headed to Northeast Korea. He was going to be in quarantine down there. It's a resort area. It borders Russia. He was worried about a lot of things. He was concerned about assassination attempts. He had gotten wind that maybe he was worried about the Chinese. He was worried about his military. He was worried that they were going to do a coup or something like this. Because this particular resort borders Russia, there's a lot of bootlegging and black market stuff that's sold to that resort, and it goes directly to the upper echelons of the party, of the North Korean Communist Party. What that means is that when the Russians want to curry favors or be on your good side, if any country wants something from you, they might send you 1,000 pounds of the best caviar as a gift to the leader. So the leader would take 50% for himself, and then the other 50% he would spread out to his generals. And then those generals would keep 50% for themselves. And then they would pass the other 50% to their majors. And then they would do the same thing with their captains all the way down until eventually you get to the peasants who are not really part of the party. They're just peasants. And they get to share, the other 80% of the population gets to share the other 1%. So when I did a remote view of North Korea a year ago, and I scanned, and specifically I'm looking to the northwest of Korea, it looks like a blackout zone. I'm sorry if I'm saying stuff I'm not supposed to be saying on air, but when I do a global scan just using the classical remote viewing technique, I'm seeing into the upper northeastern area. It's darkened out and I'm not seeing a lot of lights, so that leads me to think that they don't have electricity or that they can't financially afford to always run the electricity over there. So that is the area where we're seeing people, there's instability and it's difficult to control those areas because those folks are the poorest of the poor. But we'll leave that for another time. But suffice to say, it looks like Kim Jong-un in this remote went to stay in the wealthiest area. I had gone to the poorest of the poor originally when I went into a remote on North Korea. Now I've gone to the wealthiest of the wealthiest, and that's the Northeast. And the Northeast is like a Riviera, and it borders, like I said, Russia. And when you come down, right, when you go into the remote further, you find yourself in what looks like the French Riviera. I mean, it's just shocking how much wealth is concentrated in this small area. yachts, champagne, prostitutes from the former Russian bloc coming in. And that brings me to the next part of this story. In this remote, it looked like Kim Jong-un had gone to that area. He was possibly infected with the coronavirus 3 days prior to leaving to head to that resort area. So he had gone to go quarantine there because it's a nice area, or he had planned on going there, but I believe he was infected before he got there. So he goes into semi-quarantine, or he goes there to party and hang out with his friends. And I'm going to do another remote about his sister after this. This is a lot of stuff. I'm going to try and get everything done in 30 minutes. But in this remote, he had the infection. He went into quarantine. He was in a wealthy part of northeastern North Korea. He may have had a cardiac event, but the cardiac event was probably because he had an underlying cardiac condition combined with the fact that he had CV, coronavirus. And the coronavirus can exacerbate underlying conditions. So in this remote, it appears that he was checked for having this happen, this cardiac event. Perhaps they attempted to place a stent or attempted to help him, and then his organs crashed. That was when the disease escalates very rapidly, and it's hard to stabilize the patient. You can't get their oxygen up. The organs begin to fail because they're having inadequate oxygen. And it could be an explanation for why when I went into the remote, I saw him in dialysis. And the other part of the remote was that I quickly remote viewed President Trump, and President Trump knows that Kim Jong-un had contracted CV and was quarantining himself in that area of North Korea, and that was why he couldn't attend. But the stuff that was not made public was that he had a medical crash while recouping from coronavirus. Last about that area where he contracted it, because it's a lot of foreign dignitaries, ladies of the evening, who like to share their affections with many. Among the upper echelons, generals, bribed officials, diplomats, etc., there was a high risk of a CV infection. In the remote, he had crashed. He had gone into organ failure. There was disseminated intravascular coagulation. He was placed on dialysis. Patient was placed on dialysis. And then I did a remote view of the nurse, and the nurse said that he had crashed very quickly when I did the remote view on her. He went from standing to brain dead. It happened very fast. He had the cardiac event while he was standing. His vitals crashed quickly. We think an infection had come in at that. I guess they didn't know at the time that he was positive for COVID. Because he was young, he did have a fairly good immune system, caused a cytokine storm, which led to disseminated intravascular coagulation, organ failure, and brain dead. That was the remote. So, could just be whimsy, having an active imagination, but that's basically what it looked like. He went down there to quarantine. He actually contracted the infection 3 days before. He might have had some minor symptoms, maybe some trouble breathing. He had a cardiac event. They treated the cardiac event. He crashed quickly after that, and they realized that he was infected. Now I want to talk a little bit more detail about the resort he's staying at. He's staying at, like I said, it looks like the French Riviera is for the richest of the rich. It's a resort hospital, state-of-the-art, that treats the upper echelons of the government. And the government works like this: 20% of the population takes 80% of the resources. the 80% have to share less than 20% amongst themselves. But it's actually less than that because there's looting, bribing, people fighting on the black market, and so eventually they might only get 12%. So this is the richest area of the rich. This is where all the money is concentrated for the country, and it's why when you go further west, as I go further west, it's almost like a wilderness, dark, underdeveloped, very bad infrastructure. Okay, so the next part of the remote was that I decided to take a look at his sister, and for whatever reason I did not write her name down, but Sung-un, something like that. Sung-un. And she was the one that, when I did a remote about Kim Jong-un's sister, she was with him at the remote, and there was a feeling that he had no clue that she hated him, that she saw him as very weak. This is the perception of Kim Jong-un by his younger sister. She talked about the fact that the 80+% get, only 12% of the resources. Then she talked a lot about her relationship with the government and with her brother's handlers, and she said that they don't have a clue how much I hate them. So there's also a feeling like a power grab, that her grandfather, who started the country, Kim Jong-un's grandfather who started the country, she says to me in the remote, I have the spirit of my grandfather. So in her mind, she sees herself as the true leader of North Korea, and that her brother was very, very weak. She's talked about the fact that her brother had an addiction. He was, a lot of people don't know this, but she said that he suffered from many addictions. She said that he suffered from an addiction to women prostitutes. He liked blonde prostitutes. I'm sorry, but this is what came in the remote. These were upper wealthy, like the upper courtesans, the wealthy, beautiful women that would come from Eastern Europe, and like the Melanias. Blonde, beautiful, looking for his Scarlett Johansson. So he spent a lot of money on that. Foreign prostitutes. He liked foreign cigars and cigarettes. He loved movies. He loved old westerns. He found it fascinating. He had a drinking problem, alcohol, and which he mixed with prescription drugs. But she said he liked jewelry and fast cars. He liked pretty things. He liked to wear them. He was fascinated by jewelry, watches. So in plainer words, he was a lot like Donald Trump, except that Donald Trump doesn't drink. So they say. The biggest addiction, she said, was that he loved food. He loved to eat. She said he partied a lot. He was extremely insecure. This is her take on her brother. He was an extremely insecure person because he couldn't live up to who his father and grandfather were. So this was someone who felt woefully inadequate in the position he found himself in, which is probably why he became like Stalin, killing all of anybody who he thought was a rival he was going to take out. She said that he was picked on actually a lot as a child. No one thought he would amount to much. He did not disappoint. He was addicted to food. Seriously, everybody knew it. You could bribe him with a piece of cake. You could bribe him with a piece of food, even as a young boy. So it was something that the family knew and they were worried about, and they were trying to control, that he literally could not stop eating, and it was because it helped with his anxiety, because he had a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety as a small child. And so he would stuff down the food to stop feeling the pit of anxiety in the belly because of this pressure. You must be, You have to measure up to who your father and grandfather were, the founder of this nation. And so this terror and the eating was terror related. It was a way of healing the terror. She says she used to bribe him by saving candy and get him to do things, and then watch the things he would do, because the parents were always trying to put him on a diet. So she would save her candy, get him to do stuff. She said she felt sorry for him. He could never fulfill our father or grandfather's shoes. I, however, feel that I carry the spirit of my grandfather in me. I don't expect an American to understand, but some of us believed in him. He really wanted to do what was best for Korea. And he wanted to have a treaty with the West. She's claiming that her grandfather did want to have a treaty, and that, for whatever reason, it didn't happen. I asked her, whose side are you on? She said, I'm on my own side. But everything is scrambled. It's like Rome here. We are all fighting for power, just fighting to survive, just fighting to get closer to the power. So then I did another remote, and I asked the generals, do you think that she's going to be, the next leader of Korea? And the general said, absolutely not. This coup is not going to happen. She lacks the necessary training to be the type of a leader you need for North Korea. You need somebody with military training. You need somebody with mediation skills. So in plain words, she's so dogmatic because she heads propaganda that she can't negotiate. She's not a negotiator. She's not a treaty maker, and she has no military training. As far as the generals feel, maybe things will be better without him, and we can forge some type of relationship with South Korea and even the West, if that's at all possible. And then the generals talked about the fact that they served under his grandfather, who I believe died in 1994, and also his father, and that this person, Kim Jong-un, is nothing like his grandfather. And it's maybe better this way. So I don't think he was poisoned. I think he feared being killed. There were certainly assassination attempts. I think he got COVID. I think he got COVID. I think he went to the remote area, this fancy Riviera place which borders Russia, to quarantine. I think he was already infected. I think he had a cardiac arrest, which was pushed because of because he had COVID, but because he had an underlying medical condition. And I think that's just gonna have to wait. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.